terms of people who are actually online. And in fact, they're more online right now than they've ever been. So it's something which is quite an interest topic for me also. And just like you, I'm also trying to learn and understand and read as much about it. What I'm going to do today is spend maybe the next half an hour, 45 minutes, taking you through a couple of thoughts that I thought may be relevant for everyone to sort of not just think about, but maybe talk about to their colleagues at business, to their management at business, and try to find better ways to utilize digital outcomes, digital ROI, and in fact, efficiently get a better ROI from a digital marketing or a digital tech initiative. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the slides that I'm going to cover today. Hopefully you can see my screen now. I'm just going to project this. I hope this is visible to everyone. Raj, just confirm this once.
Yeah, it's visible. It's visible for me.
Okay, perfect. So what we are going to do today is basically touch upon 2-3 areas which are very close to any digital investment initiative, a digital marketing initiative, or a technology initiative, which finally leads to a consumer buying or doing a transaction at a business, be it an offline or an online scenario. So what we are going to do is we're going to cover how consumers are responding to COVID-19 to set the basis of this conversation. Then we'll move on to what is the new normal for digitals and what can we learn from what we have seen so far in digital. And maybe a little bit of tips and tricks here and there around what are the kind of ways to look at a digital channel when it comes to a marketing investment. Then the third and the final piece that I'm going to cover is as we proceed in a new world where consumer behavior may have evolved, the way we are doing business may have evolved, hopefully more digital in the coming days. How can organizations plan in a way and execute in a way which leads to a better digital ROI? I think a lot of organizations have been planning this for quite some time. Some have been successful, some have been marginally successful. I would try to share some of my experiences, and eventually the idea here is to open up the Q&A post this PPT, so that I would like to hear out your questions and maybe learn a little bit from you also in terms of what you feel is happening in your business and what can be done with digital there. All right. So first of all, I mean, this is something which I think we have to agree to disagree at some level, that what we are seeing right now is some kind of a pause, some kind of a break on a really fast moving car that we had in our life. And now suddenly the economy, the business and the consumer behavior is in fact adapting to the new order or the new way the world is going to work in the coming weeks. I mean, just think about yourself, how much of online content were you consuming prior to lockdown versus what you're consuming 25 days into lockdown as of today. And while you think about that, think about how the businesses have also started responding to you by sending you more information, by communicating to you a lot more about things which are not related to an actual offer, which pushes you to buy a phone or any other kind of product, but actually where a business steps up and thinks about how is my consumer feeling and what can I do about it, right? So how I see this whole crisis situation as of today and how I see the world turning from here on would be, it's actually a new start. And as we sort of proceed in this, the idea is to sort of learn and read and observe as much as possible so that we can adapt to it as quickly as possible. Now, this is something which McKinsey did as a study almost 23rd to 30th of March, around that time frame, where they reached out to some 1,500 plus people in India. And of course, other countries are also mentioned here. But I want to focus primarily on India. Now, this study was basically about a survey where McKinsey wanted to understand how people are spending time on online or internet channels. And basically, if you look at the results of the study, and I'm going to focus primarily on India here, What you'll see here is live news is something which sort of stays the same. We were interested in live news earlier, and we are now interested in live news more than ever, be it about COVID-19 or any other kind of initiatives related to essential and non-essential goods, and how quickly they'll start getting to a consumer. But what's interesting to see here is a channel called as YouTube. Now, I don't know if everyone here is aware that the top search engine in the world is Google, I think, which everyone is aware of. But the second highest searches which happen on any search engine is actually YouTube. Now, this is something which is interesting as a trend which Google has been predicting for the last couple of years, that more consumers are moving towards video content. And in fact, you would have also noticed that in your social media news feeds like your Facebook or Instagram, in the last couple of years, slowly the newsfeed had transitioned from a static image to an actual video. And this is only going to grow from here on. And what you can see here is consumers sort of becoming more interested in video content and looking at information not just by searching on Google search, but also looking at information while going on YouTube and searching something there. Now, this is a huge sort of shift if you were to think about where do you want to put your marketing money, because eventually the consumers are moving towards a video based content consumption scenario. So it's very likely that in the coming days, weeks and months, a lot of businesses will open up to the idea of launching their own set of video channels, coming up with video strategy initiatives, and driving a lot more content marketing on YouTube. And YouTube is just one here. Of course, there is a lot of other video content. There are a lot of other video content platforms like Vimeo and so on and so forth, which have a huge penetration with respect to the kind of audiences you may have for your business. Of course, movies and shows, be it your Netflix, Amazon Prime, these are things which, I mean, potentially all of us are also doing, right? So this is something which is definitely picking up. And just to sort of point out here, this study was actually done while the lockdown was on. So you may see certain behaviors actually cementing in the last 20, 25 days since the lockdown, because you kind of become habitual to things. And it's actually an age-old saying. I'm not sure if there's a scientific fact to it, but it usually takes 21 days to develop a habit, right? That's what we have read in literature. And if you think about it, what is going to happen now is we're going to be more interested in watching movies and shows, maybe not on the usual DTH platforms like your Tata Sky, Dish TV, etc. But we may even move towards Hotstar, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and all these OTTs, which come up with a huge amount of content every now and then. Now, this is one very interesting insight which we have seen happening in automobile business, specifically, where typically a lot of brand advertising where you're trying to communicate the value of a car. For example, if you're trying to communicate the value of a BMW car, we would do these half-pager advertisements in the national dailies. Now, typically what has happened is a lot of people, if you look here at the bottom of the slide, the amount of information that people used to read on print media has actually gone down by 10%. Now, I don't want you to focus on 10% here, but I want you to focus on this actually decreasing over a period of time. And when you think about it, the way we would think about, let's say, marketing a particular car, would actually have a lot of impact on the way we plan our budgets. So, for example, if we are allocating a certain percentage of our budgets on paper advertising, on print advertising, on magazine advertising, we would actually start maybe looking at reducing those monies and actually focusing them on the same news media outlets, but from the perspective of, let's say, a timesofIndia.com website or any other websites which are news related. Another thing which has also become important now is video games. A lot of consumers across the age groups, be it a one-year-old kid to someone who is above 60, anyone and everyone usually has some video games or some apps which are games on their mobile phone or their computer. And what is happening is the amount of engagement a person can do while playing a game is something which is actually increased because of this new shift in the lockdown. And while we are at home, we have a little more time because now we are traveling, not really traveling. So what is also happening is there's going to be a shift in the way brands are going to look at uh, video game platforms, and all these consumer apps where people come to engage on something fun, something witty, something which is a very feel good factor. Because that is something which gives you a relief also as a consumer in such testing times. So potentially that could be one of the reasons why people are also moving towards video games. But having said that, the idea here or the takeaway here is to look at it from a marketeer's perspective and think about what all kind of video game apps would you want to advertise on to actually reach out to the right set of audience who may potentially buy your products and services. uh, Moving to the next slide. Now this is something which is a behavioral study in the same McKinsey study that they did, where they want to understand, are people getting more habitual to using these different kinds of services? Were they using it earlier, or do are they going to actually increase the usage, or the number of people who are going to use the service is going to increase? And it's quite interesting that this whole delivery business, which we've been hearing about, Swiggy's of the world, Zomato's of the world, talking about for all this while, and whenever we used to get a good offer, we would actually go on them, has kind of become a larger market, a larger play. And that is kind of reflective on this light blue side of this graph, where the light blue side of the graph represents what people have started using recently, and the dark blue side tells you about what people were already using for some time. Now if you look at delivery business, it's kind of doubled for restaurant business, and the grocery business is almost increased by 50% in terms of usage. Now, what I want you to think about is your own business perspective, where you are in a business where you are trying to, let's say, sell a consumer good, where a person was supposed to visit your outlet or visit your office. How can you come up with different ways through digital to actually implement some kind of a delivery based network to actually do that? Now, this is something which may have a lot more acceptability with the consumer, as with respect to maybe what they would have had before the lockdown or before this crisis. So this is something to actually think about. There are actually similar large trends which you would have noticed while you would be working from home, which is about people trying to use more of video learning tools, remote learning tools. Uh, right now, we are doing this video conference as a perfect example of how we have evolved as learners for digital. We are using a Zoom app, right? I don't know how many of you ever used the Zoom app before this entire lockdown started, and how frequently are you now using it as compared to what you used to do before. So what's interesting here to see is that the kind of information that you may have to pass on to your consumer in a face-to-face meeting may actually slowly start moving towards a video or a virtual or a teleconferencing platform. And this is quite interesting for a business, for example, like automobiles, where a lot of touch and feel actually goes with a customer. On an average, a customer visits 2.5 times before he buys a car. He or she buys a car, and there is a huge amount of real estate that any automobile business is invested in, or any retail business per se is invested in, when it comes to making sure that you give the consumer an experience which is long lasting whenever they visit your outlets. So this is actually an interesting aspect where a lot of cost cutting measures may also come through eventually. But as a sales and marketing tactic, this could be something which may even work for you in the short term. Going ahead, if you are in a business of health and fitness, and or if you're a dietitian, or you are marketing for someone who is in health and fitness business, I think it's a great time to sort of get on digital. Because what has happened is, because we are all sitting at home, because we are not really allowed to go out, and it's for our own safety, uh, we may suddenly be interested to find out about, okay, what kind of videos can I watch out to build my health, build my fitness, and at the same time, let's say, learn a new hobby like a yoga, or a breathing exercise like pranayama and so on and so forth. And what would typically happen in this scenario is, as you move forward in the coming weeks and months, you may still want to go to gyms, but a lot of your cardio may happen, for example, in the confines of your own society, because you may not feel the need to be at a gym to actually do your cardio. Now, this is, of course, a projection, which is very dependent on large sets of consumer behaviors. Uh, the idea here that I'm trying to tell you is the businesses or the services that we were consuming as consumers are actually transforming over a period of time, and we are kind of becoming habitual to experiencing them from the confines of our house or our society. Moving to the next slide. Now, what I'm going to do is spend maybe the next 15 or 20 minutes taking you through all the digital channels that we keep talking about, right? And there's going to be a little bit of jargon involved here. Hopefully that should be comfortable for everyone here. Otherwise, you can always open up at the end towards the Q&A. I'll be happy to answer more of your questions. The idea is pretty straightforward, that I'm going to jump into defining how a marketeer perceives digital investments and how he transforms a digital lead and helps how he transforms the business processes to help the digital lead move from the point of an interest to an actual point of conversion. Now, the first slide that I'm showing to you here right now is something that you would have heard about, maybe you are already doing in your business, but these are typically the components of any kind of digital investment that you intend to do over a period of time. Now, some companies may want to do a pick and choose strategy between a blog or a mobile app, but typically you would have a website to start with. And to support that, you'll have a hosting server, you'll have some kind of internal networking systems to support your internal IT requirements. And at the same time, you would be concerned about data security. Now, what is important here is to understand that setting up any kind of digital infrastructure in a company or running a digital infrastructure in a company is something like, for example, a manufacturing company would buy a land to set up a factory. It's a long-term investment. It's an investment which supports a lot of short-term planning and investments and ROI for you. And what is really important when you're actually embarking to the new normal on digital in this post-COVID world scenario, it's very important that you become more inclusive about these different components and start using them more proactively and strategically in your business. The way we like to look at these investments is we like to look at them as costs which amortize over a period of time. So something like, if you were to think about setting up a data security layer in your business so that the consumer data that you're collecting through your website, through your mobile app, and your social media, and so on and so forth, how is that data protected? How is that data reusable while ensuring the data privacy of the consumers? So it's very critical that if you intend to utilize the new set of digital consumers, the new set of digital behaviors of consumers, the idea is to become more inclusive about all these different components. And the idea is also to look at this cost as not a quarterly cost or a yearly cost, but to actually look at it as a cost which is amortized over a couple of years. Because if you think about it, if you've launched a website as of today, 1 year or 2 years down the line, as you keep launching more products and services, your website as a structure may not change. Your hosting server as a structure may not change until the technology, of course, becomes obsolete, which usually takes a cycle of 4 to 5 years. So what is happening in this scenario is you would be launching different features on the website or the mobile app or blog and so on and so forth, but the core infrastructure of your website, the server, the data security sort of remains the same or only grows incrementally. So the idea here is to not look at this as a marketing or a short-term driven investment, but to actually look at it from a long-term amortized cost perspective. Moving towards the digital initiatives, which potentially organizations can do in the coming days and weeks. The idea for any kind of digital initiative is to drive a consumer or help a consumer through the purchase funnel. Now, this is something as a purchase funnel, which I've mentioned here for representative purposes from Gartner's report. You can have your own more in-depth purchase funnel. But just for the simplicity of this conversation, I've kept it here as awareness, consideration, action, and buy now stages in a purchase funnel. What I'm going to do now in the next 4 to 5 slides is pick up each of these areas and talk about how a digital marketing approaches in helping a consumer through these purchase funnels. And then we'll try to sort of link all of this together and see it from a perspective of how you can drive this as a business initiative in your organization. Now, typically, the awareness and the consideration stage. Now, these are the two stages where a consumer typically, and maybe I can quote an example here. Now, let's say you were to buy a car. Let's say you were to buy a BMW X1. Now, you know that it's going to cost a lot of money. You know that BMW is a great brand. You know that there is a lot of competition which is along with BMW. So, for example, there is a Mercedes, there is a Audi, and you also know that there are certain options which are costing little less, but it gives you the features that you want in a car. Now, that's how a consumer would be thinking at a stage where he is just aware about the information. Now, as a brand, what you want to do right now is you want to push him through the awareness stage to the consideration stage. So the idea here, or a call to action here for a consumer, is to start reading about the brand, the product, and get more comfortable with, let's say, a BMW X1 as a car, and actually read about how the car looks like, what are the features, what is the safety, what is there for my family, what is the cost of owning a car, what is the resale value, what kind of a resale value I can get for my existing car, and so on and so forth. Typically, in such scenarios, a consumer may not even come to our dealerships. A consumer may not even call the dealership to inform the dealership that I am interested in buying this car. This is all happening very passively. In such scenarios, as a brand, what matters to you is one, coming up with content which is useful for the consumer to understand the awareness and the consideration aspects of a product. So typically you would want to create content around BMW X1 has the smart intelligent feature which helps you identify what's the mileage of the car at any given time, for example. Or BMW X1 has the largest boot space in its own category when you compare it with other brands in a similar price range. Or something like a BMW X1 gives you an experience where your family gets a sunroof on the top of the car, which helps you enjoy your long drives and your weekend drives. Now, these are very experiential elements which excite a consumer, and there are, of course, a lot of them apart from this. These kind of elements help you as a marketer to get more close to the consumer and at the same time communicate value of the product or the brand to the consumer in a very passive way. Here, you may want to use tactics like social media. You may want to, let's say, launch some videos on YouTube. You may want to post some pictures on Pinterest. You may want to answer some questions on Quora, write some blogs. You may want to come up with a lot of articles which go on your website so that it gets indexed in Google search results. You may want to think about where is my consumer really engaged with. Let's say he's interested in investments because there's the month of taxation, for example. So what can I do to help him read about a content in a context of finance, in a context of investment? So that's where you will think about affiliate marketing channels and so on and so forth. You may even have a consumer which has already purchased a BMW car earlier. Let's say he has a sedan and he's thinking of buying a car for his family. Now, in that scenario, he may want to give the car to, let's say, his kids or his wife. And in that scenario, you may want to think about if he's an existing consumer, he already knows me. He already knows my brand. He already knows about the value of the car. He already knows about the experience of owning that product, the costs attached to owning that product. What kind of information can I give to this consumer who is already engaged with me in a manner which is easier for him to consume, but at the same time, it's not intrusive. So it's not like, for example, an ad which you are pushing towards the consumer. The ad is following him throughout his internet journey. He sees the ad some 10, 15 times. No, that's not the idea. The idea is, depending on the kind of consumer and the stage in the purchase funnel of the consumer, you may want to pick and choose and modify the kind of channels you're using for your digital marketing initiatives. And you may also want to look at then what kind of ROIs are you getting from certain marketing initiatives or certain marketing channels, so that you can reallocate your budgets over a period of time. So what this allows you to do as a marketer is allows you to break down the problem of how can I help the consumer derive more value from his online experience when he's visiting my website, my social media, my mobile app, and eventually get so close to him that the consumer is actually interested in visiting the dealership or visiting your retail store and actually buying or doing a transaction. In terms of a consumer experience, now what we are talking about here is a consumer experience where you are looking at an awareness stage and a consideration stage. Typically, the user flow in such kind of initiatives starts from showing an ad or maybe pushing some content on email or social media. And what you're doing there is, in terms of business metrics, in terms of understanding how costs are involved in this entire marketing initiative, you start tracking certain kinds of metrics. For example, you look at cost per mil, which is CPM, you look at cost per click, which is CPC, you look at CTRs, you look at cost per view, you look at engagement rates, you look at website visits. Because here the eventual goal is to get a bang for a buck while you're pushing the consumer to read the information on social media, on mobile app, on your website. And that's the whole objective of the advertisement. The advertisement is not really about pushing an offer. The advertisement is not really about visiting the retail store. The advertisement is actually about helping the consumer understand the product or the brand better. And while he is doing that, he ends up visiting your social media or website or mobile app, which is the second stage. Now, in this stage, the kind of environment you're giving, the kind of user experience you're giving on the website or the mobile app or the social media becomes very critical. So you start looking at a lot of business metrics like bounce rates, pages per visitor, time spent on website, exit rates, and so on and so forth. The idea here is to track that for every rupee of marketing investment that you're doing in improving the consumer experience, what is the value a consumer is deriving out of it? So for example, if you have written an article which is about, let's say, top 5 features in a Maruti 800 car or maybe a Wagon R, you want the consumer to actually read that information if he comes on the website. But if you notice that, for example, your bounce rate is 90, 95%, then there is something really wrong with the website. There's something really wrong with the content. Maybe your ads are not really communicating the information well. And the consumer is not really happy with your content on the website and so on and so forth. So it's very important that when you're running consumer experience initiatives for the top end of the funnel, which is awareness or consideration stage, you actually think about bounce rates, you actually think about all the metrics mentioned here, and think from a perspective that, am I really generating any value in terms of a consumer experience and at the same time a business investment into marketing? Eventually, when consumers are on the second stage, some of those people may be so engaged or so interested in your content that they will start engaging with your content more frequently. Now, this is the third stage of consumer experience, after which there is a very high likelihood of transaction, after which there is a very high likelihood of a consumer actually visiting your office or your retail store, or going to your website and actually making a cart on an e-commerce store. Now, this kind of an engagement actually requires a lot of cost metrics to understand and a lot of customer service to really extract value in terms of what you can do with your marketing budgets. When you look at people who are coming on your website, let's say you're looking at Google Analytics, and you notice that my cost per view for certain pages, which are actually the top pages for a particular product, are not really in line with what the amount of money that my industry actually invests into it. In such scenarios, you may want to look at what are the previous content initiatives which have really worked for you, given you a bang for a buck, and then think about what can I do to add the kind of right creatives, the kind of right information, talking about the right kind of keywords to go into that content, or the kind of imagery you're showing in the video, and then really A/B testing and arriving at a point where the consumer actually starts engaging with your content better. This is the aspect which is related to the business costs and understanding the end-to-end consumer experience from a cost perspective. While you're doing these consumer experience initiatives, what is simultaneously happening is the same consumer is also present on social media, and he may start engaging with your social media handles, your Twitter, your Facebook, your LinkedIn, your Instagram, and so on and so forth. In such scenarios, what really matters for a digital marketer is what is the value you have generated for the consumer to make the conversation more engaging on social media. And mind you, over a period of time, what we have seen in the last couple of years is people are becoming a lot more receptive to the way the information is presented to them, and they're being a lot more open about the feedback that they're giving to a brand or a product or a service. What that means is, as a business, you may want to think about your marketing function and your customer experience or after sales function, and finding a lot of synergy or a lot of coherence in the work where your consumer is satisfied both on offline and online channels. Now, that's the aspect where you want to think about your online reputation management matrix, where you think about how quickly am I responding to customers' problem, how much of a consumer feedback is positive for me versus negative for me. Is the consumer actually disliking my communications or my content or my product or my service and commenting somewhere, tagging me somewhere more often than earlier? Or is the consumer actually reaching out and sharing my content to their own social media platforms where they want their knowns to know about the amazing quality of work that you as an organization are doing, or you as a digital marketer is pushing in terms of marketing communications? So it's very important that when you're thinking about customer experience, you do not purely think about it from a perspective of your likes or your followers. That's just the surface of the matrix that you can think of. That's, of course, a feel-good factor, but it does not really create value for your consumer, and it does not really help him transact quickly in a considerable shorter period of time. So the idea here is to help you understand by breaking this down in these 3 steps. And typically when we measure this ROI, we do not really look at a monthly ROI, we look at a quarterly ROI in such scenarios, because it may depend from industry to industry. In fact, we have noticed that if you're buying a car as a consumer, which is under 10 lakh rupees, you would typically buy that car in less than 30 days of your first search online. Versus if you're buying a luxury brand, you may want to even wait it out until maybe a quarter or even 2 quarters before you actually make up your mind to buy that car. So it really depends on your business in terms of how quickly your customer converts from the first point of contact he or she has with you, and then defining the consumer experience journey in the same time frame, not in the time frame that you expect your business numbers to show up. That is a different problem altogether, and we're going to cover that later on in these slides. But what you're primarily going to focus here is, how can I help the consumer derive value during this buying journey, howsoever long it is, with respect to my product or service? Moving towards the bottom end of the stages, which is primarily looking at when we talk about any kind of action or purchase initiative, the idea here is, as a marketer, you want to lead, you want to create more transactions, you want to generate more leads, you want to push more offers, you want to schedule a visit campaigns where someone is actually visiting your retail store or visiting your office. It could be even a marketing activity, like for example, if we were to advertise this particular webinar and come up with a marketing campaign where we put in a certain amount of money and we expect people to sign up, even that is a transaction initiative. So the idea here in this slide that I'm trying to tell you is, irrespective of whatever paid marketing channel that you choose, What matters is the end objective of your campaign, which is your call to action of your campaign. And while you are deciding these call to actions, what you intend to do is reach out to the consumer with the right kind of marketing communication, the right kind of audience targeting, the right kind of creatives, the right kind of videos. And it requires a lot of testing and arriving at that final stage, which you may want to sort of reflect upon here, where we are typically talking about showing an ad in such transactional marketing initiatives or bottom end of the funnel initiatives, where we'll be looking at primarily CPC, CPM, CTR. We'll be pretty much looking at the same matrix for the first two stages, which is the ad stage or the website or mobile app stage. But what definitely changes is my call to action, as I was describing earlier, which is the transactions. So typically here you would want to think about, if you're an e-commerce business, what's the cost of creating a cart? If you are acquiring customers online by selling them a service online, let's say you are Amazon.com, in that scenario, you may want to think about what's my cost per acquisition, which is your CPA. So if you're advertising, for example, an iPhone, which costs a certain amount of money, if I'm spending, let's say, 100,000 rupees, what is my cost of acquisition for every 100,000 rupees? That is what you will really track in such transaction marketing scenarios. Now, typically as a marketer, you kind of try to do this everywhere, but the reason why we have broken down the entire marketing funnel for you, or a purchase funnel for you, is to really highlight the aspect where do you want to really think about the end sale of a product or a service, and where do you really want to think about the end excitement for a consumer or a value for a consumer. Typically, for such kind of user journeys, we would look at a monthly sort of an ROI, where we are primarily focusing on people who are supposed to buy a particular product or service in the current month. So that's the idea here. This is the real marketing investment which gives you results very quickly in the same month and helps your sales team achieve targets. The earlier marketing investment, which is about the experience investment that I covered in this slide, is primarily about helping the consumer move on from the first two stages of the purchase funnel and pushing as many people as possible here. Or like we say in marketing, that if you have a big funnel on the top, you'll always have a big funnel at the bottom. So the idea here is to understand, by breaking this down as two very different problem statements for a digital marketer. In terms of marketing communications, now this is something which McKinsey published recently, which was about what are the four tenets that consumer brands or even B2B brands think about when they are communicating to their consumers. Now, it could be about individual safety, it could be about security and stability of the consumers, the kind of investments they're doing into your products and services. It could be even about the convenience and the ease of use. And it could be also about the kind of emotional bond that you're building up with the consumer. What we need to understand right now as a marketeer is, unlike any other times, in current scenario, the consumer does not really have a free will to buy your product and service. He is actually constrained with respect to, maybe he's thinking about what is going to happen to his job, unfortunately, or what is going to happen to his business in coming days. It's very critical for a consumer right now that you empathize with the consumer, you're kind to the consumer, and you're trying to communicate the value to the consumer in a very, very simple, elegant way, which appeals to anyone who would be just happy to read your information. So it's very critical that our digital communications are oriented in a certain fashion. Just to give you an example, Big Basket did this email campaign a couple of days back, where they started with a contactless delivery service. Now, if you are a Big Basketeer or if you used the app earlier, you would have noticed that it asks you to choose your delivery options. And on that specific page on your mobile app or your website, they have given you an option of contactless delivery. Now, this is quite contextual for any kind of business trying to stay relevant to their consumers, offering them convenience and making sure that their safety is taken care of. So it's very important for you as an entrepreneur or as a person who is in digital marketing, that how can you really create that one simple wow factor for your consumer, which may go a long way for him. What also matters is empathy. You may want to think about how can I communicate the information better to the consumer while still empathizing with the consumer, while still making sure that I'm not really being too pushy as a digital marketer in terms of my marketing communications. As a business, this is something which is funny, that at any time in history when anyone is doing business, what they try to do is try to take advantage of a convenience factor that a consumer is looking out for and charge them a bomb. The problem with this strategy is you're not really offering a value in such scenarios. What you're doing is primarily just telling to your consumer. For example, if you are a kirana store and you're thinking about selling some kind of a product or service to your consumer by asking them to, let's say, get a delivery to their homes, but you do not really tell them what is the real extra cost a consumer has to pay for home delivery. And when your delivery boy goes to the consumer and tries to deliver it, the consumer suddenly gets to know that 20% of his transaction value is just the delivery cost. Now that's a really bad experience, and most likely you'll lose a consumer. The idea here is, if you're creating that wow factor by offering some kind of convenience to your consumer, make sure that you actually give him some realizable value. Make sure that the consumer feels good about that value. Otherwise, what you're doing is typically not going to help you retain the consumer. In fact, it may lead to a lot of bad publicity on online channels. Now, moving ahead, now this is a famous saying of Bob Dylan that I really like, which is about the times they are changing. Uh, if you think about the new normal on digital, the new normal is not just about how can I utilize my marketing budgets as a marketer better, but it's also about how is my consumer going to behave now going ahead? Or will I be able to supply the product and services at the quality that I used to supply earlier? So it is really important that the whole ecosystem of a digital initiative is built over a period of time in our organizations and in your organizations. And while we are doing that, it's very important that we are susceptible and very adaptive to the changes which are happening in the world. Now, this is something which you may have heard time and again, but there is a very specific area that I want to talk about, which is about planning cash flow oriented business initiatives. It's very critical that any business right now is suffering from unprecedented loss in demand, unprecedented loss in supply chain. Maybe they are not even allowed to do business. For example, automobiles. It's very important that your business sustains through this important period of time, this crisis time, and this is the low hanging fruit for any business to utilize their digital initiatives for. What you need to do is think about what are my large cash flow problems, and can I really solve them by utilizing technology, communications, and any kind of digital initiatives to help streamline the business and retain the cash flows, so that when the time improves, I would be able to generate a lot more value from those cash flow opportunities that I would have done right now. It's very important in such stages to have teams which are multi-departmental. It's surprising to me that an initiative where, for example, this company I would not like to name was planning to launch a mobile app. They came up with the idea that the consumer will be able to buy the product through the mobile app. Their website was not so great, and the consumer used to buy the products very frequently from the business owner. Now, in such scenario, the business owner came up with the idea that, you know what, I'm going to put a CFO, I'm going to put a IT guy, and I'm going to put a digital marketer into a multi-department team to figure out this mobile app. I think that's a recipe for disaster, because any kind of digital initiative is like starting a business from scratch. When you start a business from scratch, you have a visibility that you want to invest a certain amount of money, but you do not really make your day-to-day decisions based on the amount of investment you're putting in the work. What you do is you try to start small. Maybe you would want to look at people with more skilled more skills and experience in such scenarios. And you may want to think about what kind of people to include in multi-departmental teams, where rather having someone who's going to keep telling you, cut the cost, don't give me an initiative which is not going to give me value tomorrow. Rather having those kind of people in the execution aspect of such digital initiatives, you should have people in digital initiatives who are executing day in and day out, and there is a real value attached to the skills or the experience they bring to the table. You may want to have a CFO maybe at a strategic level when you're talking about digital initiatives, but you may want to avoid until it's a finance initiatives. You may want to avoid, let's say, operations initiatives. You may want to avoid them in, let's say, a marketing initiative or a sales initiative, where you're primarily trying to test something and then go back to the strategy team and tell them that, you know what, we have figured this out. This is what works. Now I need more money to scale. I think much that's very much a better way to execute things. It has given a lot of results to us. In fact, the next slide is actually about agility. You may want to think about what is your organization really agile about. You may say that, you know what, I run a dealership which sells cars. I will start selling my cars online from tomorrow onwards. Come on, that is not something which is going to happen in a day. It will require a significant amount of process transformation, marketing initiatives, communicating to the consumers, having consumer acceptability that they're okay with the idea of buying a car online, and then actually moving towards implementing that slowly and steadily in your organization. So what I'm trying to tell you here is you really need to customize your strategy when it comes to transforming your business on digital channels and taking that first step or moving quickly towards digitization. Another thing which I find a lot of times happening is when you have group projects, which I think I kind of covered earlier, is have people who are really contributing to the work. You do not really want to have people who are mostly talking, mostly preparing presentations, and mostly not interested in ownership. I think it's very critical for businesses that you build ownership in such small teams who are trying to crack their digital initiatives. It could be a supply chain initiative where you're trying to, let's say, communicate to your vendors in a faster, better, and a convenient way that what is the demand you're looking at in terms of procuring their services. Or it could be a scenario where you're a sales guy, you are into enterprise sales, your customer is not really paying the money that he was planning to invest earlier into your technology. What can you create value in the coming days for him or her? And how do you take that piece of information as a sales guy and give it to the digital initiative team, which breaks it down further and arrives at something which is very actionable for you as a salesperson? So I think it's very important that the ownership has to be existent in such teams. It may not be an ownership of spending large amounts of money. I don't think so that's advisable at all. But definitely what's doable and what's practically possible is to have a very keen eye on breaking down those milestones of where do you want to be at. If you want 100 sales guys to use a similar initiative, you may want to start at one. If you think there's going to be an amazing mobile app that you'll launch which will have so many features, start with a paper or a PPT based mock-up and show it to the sales guys. Let them give you the feedback on what can work for them in their sales initiatives. This is something which I think a lot of marketeers talk about, a lot of digital strategists talk about, but rarely do. One thing that I've learned in all this experience with digital is it's very important to track the data because there is so much of data, and not get lost in the data, because it's very important that if you're not looking at the right set of metrics, like the metrics that we covered earlier in transactional marketing or consumer experience marketing, you'll get lost in the jargons of the digital world and you would not be able to communicate well to your management, and most likely your budgets are going to go away as a marketeer, and eventually you'll see that the things are not happening even if you're trying so hard. So it's very important that you measure the outcomes of such digital initiatives from a team perspective or even from an individual perspective, and really track them against all the milestones that you would have set while you have decided to go on a particular digital initiative. All right, so I think this was pretty much what I want to convey in terms of the digital initiatives, the kind of world that I foresee post-COVID. the kind of things you can do as a digital marketer to track your metrics better. I think I'll open up to the Q&A now, and any kind of questions are welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sameer, for this wonderful presentation. You've given us the very, very interesting insights, starting from the data, starting from analyzing the consumer behavior, how they are changing. You basically started with what we call the inbound marketing, awareness, consideration, and decision. And you break that down and brief that down, how the metrics can be for each of the stages. Now, we'll start with the Q&A. So our team has prepared some of the very interesting questions for you. So we'll start putting across, and then in the last 10 to 15 minutes, we'll take up the questions from the audience. So the first question that we have is obviously due to the COVID-19 pandemic, all the sectors, whether we talk about the travel industry, whether we talk about the hotel industry or restaurant industry, that have transformed like anything. Now, since you belong to the automobile industry since many years, what do you see how the automobile industry going to transform post COVID-19? What's your take for the same?
Sure. It's actually a great question. Even I'm trying to figure out most of the answers or the different aspects of this transformation which is going on. And as we proceed, I think things will become clear with time. I would like to talk about some milestones which have happened in automobile industry. If I take you back to 2016, when demonetization happened in November, what really happened at that time was it suddenly pushed a lot of transactions which happen offline to digital modes. Beyond that, what also happened is the way people were doing their business in India and Indian economy being largely driven by informal sectors. What has happened is the kind of cash requirements a dealership or an automobile business usually has started to dry up very quickly. So there was a cost challenge. There was also a challenge of the way the transactions were being done. Eventually, what happened after that was a lot of automobile dealerships, a lot of automobile companies started investing heavily on customer relationship management softwares, started investing heavily on their websites, their mobile apps, and started pushing a lot of people to actually go online and research about their products. Now, when you sort of fast forward this, another event which happened in between was GST, which again created a lot of sudden changes in the way the automobile sector has been working, primarily around the used car business, primarily around the way the auto part procurement works for a dealership business. In such scenarios, over a period of time, post GST, a lot of sanitization in the way the business was being conducted, and at the same time, the kind of processes which are around to get some kind of an efficiency in the way you procure your products also really happened, because it really structurally pushed a lot of people to follow the regulations and ensure that you meet a certain quality criteria as a vendor. Now, when you sort of see these two things and look at the way the consumer behavior is also changing now, what has definitely transformed is the amount of investments companies are going to do on digital. I think there's going to be a kink if you were to draw a graph where you would say that how my investments rise over a period of time. It's going to be a sudden shift in terms of the investments being increased. For example, BMW recently launched a website where you can actually buy a car online, and it allows a lot of automobile dealerships to actually speak to their consumers, help them through their buying journey, do the entire documentation online, and it's an amazing initiative that they've done. A lot of other companies are also doing similar stuff in their own capacities. I feel that as an automobile dealership business, yes, a consumer will be more knowledgeable before he reaches the dealership. Yes, a consumer would be more interested in talking about things which he or she would have looked at online, which has a direct impact on your sales training programs. There's going to be another scenario where you may want to place your dealerships very strategically in coming weeks and years, where you may want to look at newer market opportunities where people are more interested in trying out cars or bikes on lease versus actually owning the product. I think these are typically the things that we are projecting to happen in the coming months and years. But having said that, the way this whole crisis unfolds, it's going to be very interesting to see how the consumer behavior also responds to it.
Great, great, great. So I think the digital investment gonna increase. That is the only certain thing that we can say, not only during the COVID-19, but also the post-COVID-19 as well. And this is where my another question lies. Now, since you mentioned the digital investment gonna increase over a couple of years, where you see the role of the influencer marketing playing?
Sure. Uh, so I have a slightly different opinion from usually what marketers talk about. You hear a lot of buzz around influence marketing, where
Exactly.
a lot of brands are investing heavily into influence marketing. I think it's a great initiative to think about it, but there are a lot of challenges related to it, which I think are very important to sort of understand before you actually put your money into influencer marketing. And I think that is also going to create a lot of impact on the way your investments are also going to grow in influencer marketing. If you think about influencer marketing, uh, a simple example for that is you have this cousin who knows everything about a car, who knows everything about the features, who knows everything about the history of the engine and the car and the way people are using the car, the cost of ownership, and so on and so forth. Now, typically, as a consumer who is interested in buying a particular car, what you would do is you will go to that individual and try to get some advice. Now, this is something that we do for literally everything, and we have these experts who are sitting all around us, right? Uh, what has happened in the last few months or years is a lot of these people, because of a low entry barrier on digital channels to create content and publicize content, they have become these digital influencers who end up getting a lot of followers, who end up getting a lot of people who are interested in reading about their content. And that has kind of become this new wave marketing channel for a lot of marketers. I feel that there are two fundamental challenges here which any marketer needs to address if they want to scale their influencer marketing initiatives. The first one is it really about the follower number that you're putting the money in? Or is it really about the coherence of the way this particular influencer communicates about anything and your brand communication? Do you see that coherence? For example, if a person is an influencer in a video gaming category, you do not want to talk about, let's say, a luxury good through this influencer. And I know for a fact that a lot of these influencers are doing that by talking about value propositions around, you know what, we've got all these people who are rich kids and they can potentially buy your products. But I can tell you that it may actually have a very bad impact on your brand if you do not really exercise it in the right way. The second point I want to talk about here is measuring the ROI of such initiatives. I think fundamentally it's a similar challenge that any digital marketer sees when he or she thinks about search engine optimization. It's a very mid to long term investment. It's not really about getting some kind of a transaction at the end of an influencer actually communicating about your product. You may get some transactions, but the most value that you'll derive from influencer marketing is going to be around more content engagement, more user experience, and the top end of the funnel that I was mentioning in my slides. So I think it's very important that the kind of matrix that you're tracking to understand the ROI of influencer marketing are very clearly laid out for you. And you do not really get carried away with the name of a particular influencer marketer or an influencer, let's say on YouTube or Instagram and so on, that you just suddenly decide to spend so much money on them because you feel that everyone is doing it and I need to do it. So yeah, that's what I have to say about influencer.
Great. So I think you have a kind of like a balanced perspective on the influencer marketing. I think the quality is something, the quality criteria, especially from the kind of the industry that you come from, like you catering to the high-end luxury segment. The quality of the influencer matters a lot, and it's beyond just the numbers of for number of followers and everything. I think that is where we need to wait to things to sort out. My next question is, since in the initial slide that you mentioned about, people are spending a good amount of time in watching the videos, spending good amount of time on OTT platform, watching series on Amazon and Netflix. My question for you is, what would be the role of the OTT platform for the automobile industry? Not just the advertisement perspective, but let's say what I want to see is, like, let's say after a couple of months, if we see any series where let's say BMW or let's say Audi, which is sponsoring the entire series, and we can actually see the kind of conversation around the brand, which is very informal. So, do you see that kind of informal marketing which would gonna happen in a couple of months?
Uh, so I don't know, it's going to be a consequence of COVID-19 per se. I think it's a very natural progression for a brand, because if you think about a luxury brand per se, they may be very particular about the kind of products or services they want to associate with. So when you talk about luxury brands in specific, they may not want to engage with any kind of product and service just because it has a volume of people watching them, be it an online episode and so on and so forth. And what you also need to understand is, if you take this, let's say, to a price point which is a 10 to 15 lakh rupee car, which a
Mhm.
middle class person can afford now. Uh, for these people also, someone like a Maruti has been doing a lot of such initiatives for quite some time. In fact, quite a few years, where they've been organizing these events, which are these adventure activities that they do. There are a lot of experience drives that they do. And there is a lot of video content which has come out of it. Yes, the content creation has been going on for quite some time. In terms of content distribution or publicity of such content, I think that is definitely going to grow, because the more we consume online through video, any kind of brand, be it a luxury brand or a mid-scale brand, would want to reach out to their consumer in as many different ways as possible, while ensuring that the sanctity of the brand is taken care of. So I feel that the marketing costs may definitely rise over a period of time, but content creation is something which is already happening for quite some time now.
Great, great. My next question is, since we are discussing about the ROI, my direct question to you is because there are, if you talk about social media platforms, you talk about the Google, you talk about the display campaigns, you talk about influencer affiliate. There are so many marketing channels which evolved over the last couple of years. What do you think the tracking has become very difficult with there are numerous metrics which are there, especially for high-end products, especially for digital marketers. Has tracking become difficult? What according to you?
Sure. That's a great question. I think this was one piece that I, as a digital marketer, has always been excited about, which is about data analytics and sort of utilizing that for solving your business problems, or solving your marketing problems, or solving your process problems. Uh, I feel that as you have more platforms which are included in your marketing initiatives, they are going to throw a lot more metrics towards you. Earlier, maybe you were purely looking at Google Analytics. When you started investing you into, let's say, Google search, you start looking at AdWords matrix. When you invest further, let's say in a Facebook, you start looking at the Facebook ad manager. So definitely the volume of platforms which are throwing this data at you is increasing. At the same time, the amount of data is also increasing. I think
Exactly.
it definitely makes a lot of things more complicated for people who find it hard to analyze data, or companies who find it tough to analyze data over and above Excel. Because I have personally worked in traditional industries where Excel is still the norm in earlier aspects of my career. And what I've seen is Excel definitely helps you create that database, but until you do not have a charting system, for example, a software like a Tableau, or you do not have any other softwares like Adobe, it's very hard to really start extracting value from insights. And until you do not have the right set of data preparation, you cannot really go out and launch an analytics software in your organization. So effectively, you cannot really use all this data which is coming to you. I think what could be pragmatic for a digital marketer would be to look at his current organization, think from a perspective that how much of a data is already available on my CRM, on my internal data sources, how much of a data can I extract from third-party sources like Google Analytics and so on, and club all of this together. Do I have the right set of tools in the organization supported by a certain infrastructure on IT that I can club all this together and access all this information remotely? I think that's the first problem to solve. Once we have moved past that problem, then we have a new challenge, which is about utilizing this data, which depends on what kind of software you use to chart this data, to look at this data from different angles. The kind of pivots you draw on Excel may be very limiting in such scenarios, and you may want to look at larger data streams which an Excel may not even support. So I think it's very important for you to realize that in your business or in your line of work, what is the current capability of your IT infrastructure to support that database? If you have so, then what kind of software tools can you put in so that the people who are really driving the P&L in your organization are able to utilize that data? Or you as a digital marketer driving your marketing campaigns is actually able to use that data and come up with some insight which can be very useful to, let's say, have an impact on the product feature, have an impact on the way you price the product, and so on. So, but it's really a progressive journey. You cannot really jump from step 1 to step 3 directly. You have to really take it step by step.
So what I can sense is not an easy task, at least to just come to the conclusion and track a data. It's a systematic and long-term process.
Absolutely, it's an infrastructure that you're developing for coming up with your insights, right?
Yeah.
So it only happens step by step.
Since I mean, my next question is also connected to the same. Since we are already discussing about the tracking the data, since you already have run the numerous digital campaigns, my questions, this particular question is for analytics perspective. What are your 3 favorite metrics for Google Analytics?
Okay.
I know it's a bit difficult, but we want to understand what's your 3 favorite metrics for Google Analytics that you'd love to track.
I think I'm definitely very panicky about my bounce rates on content that we have on the website.
Okay.
I'm definitely worried about the kind of communications we are doing. So I would say CTR, a click-through rate, and of course your end transaction, right? I mean, if you do not have a transaction, you do not have a sale. If you do not have a sale, you do not have a marketing investment. So, I mean, the whole activity becomes futile at some point if you do not have a transaction. So I would say CTR, bounce rate, and transactions.
Okay, great. I think these are the most very important metrics to track for any marketer. Now, just wanted to ask you, since you have run the numerous digital campaigns for automobile industry in past, would you like to share any 2 memorable digital campaigns with the participants that become memorable?
Sure. So, I mean, in the confines of the conversation that we are having so far, and with respect to the slides that I've also covered, I would talk about this one digital initiative that we did, and eventually we took some aspect of marketing and involved that in our work. So typically in a retail business, a lot of customers call you at your front desk or your reception. For an automobile business, when you walk into a dealership, the first thing that you see is, of course, a car, and the other thing that you see is a receptionist who is answering calls almost all the time or greeting the customers walking into the store all the time. Now, typically, if you look at the calls which come to a receptionist, it's very hard to really figure out what kind of calls are coming to a receptionist. Is it a business call? Is it a consumer trying to arrive at your dealership and he or she may not be able to find that location? Or is it just about talking to a salesperson who is not reachable, and a consumer is trying to reach that person? So what we did was we actually implemented a whole infrastructure around tracking the kind of calls which are happening at a reception of our dealerships. And what we did was We utilized some technology to enable that. We looked at some business processes that we could modify at the showroom level so that the sales guy can also respond to it quickly in case it's a business call coming to reception. And we also looked at how can we let people know that they can actually reach out to us on this particular number. Because if you would have noticed, and if you're in Bombay, a lot of cars which are sold by us have a number plate which has our name and the number. Now, typically, that's what consumer sees when they're on the road and let's say suddenly a car breaks down or something else happens. Now, in such scenarios, what we did was, in this whole initiative, what we did was, we first got the technology together. We pulled up at one dealership, and suddenly we realized that almost 25% of the calls coming at a reception are purely business calls. And quite a few of them, almost 20% or 18% of the calls were actually about the end transaction where a person is looking to close the deal with a car purchase. Now, when we realize that there is so much of value in the technology at this particular reception where a lot of people are calling, we identified this huge business opportunity which was sitting right in front of us and we never knew about it. And these are all inbound calls, right? Mind you, I mean, these are all customers who are looking to buy something, or they're your existing customers and they're looking to get their car serviced because they're stuck in some situation. And it's very important, not only from a business perspective of transactions or sales, but also from a consumer experience perspective, that you are there when a person calls you up in the time of a crisis. I think it's very important that as a digital initiative leader or as a digital marketer, uh, once we saw that value, we came up with this huge marketing campaign, which is purely around Google mobile search campaigns, where we would advertise very simple 60 character messages to consumers, and we will push the idea that if you are stuck somewhere, if you need some help, if your sales guys are not reachable, if you want to inquire about a product or a service that we sell, please just call on this number and we're going to respond back to you in 30 minutes. So we created this whole ecosystem of convenience and at the same time this potential business which was sitting in front of us but we never knew about it. So I think it was a mix of the infra that we put in place and at the same time the marketing communications that we did to ensure that we derive some value out of this campaign.
Great. Sounds, what you suggested, it's a very interesting campaign on the digital platform. My next question is about a very interesting topic, especially for automobile industry, that is ORM. So with the geo penetration and with the mobile penetration, entire India came into the digital platforms, and initially where brand used to be the king, now the customer is the king. So if he's facing any issue, he has the platform, he can take up the video, he can basically share his feedback on social media. Now that was a customer perspective. Now my specific question is, what do you think ORM has gained a lot of momentum with the digitalization? What's your perspective?
Sorry, I did not get the last sentence. ORM has gained.
With the ORM has gained lots of momentum with the digitalization. So let's say if I'm facing an issue, I directly can go to the YouTube, I can make a video, I can go to the Twitter, I can post a tweet or something. So I think that is something customer is right now into the real power. He's right now the real king. Now, if you talk about from the brand perspective, what's your take on the same from the ORM context?
Sure. So, so from a brand perspective, if you think about it, when you sold a product or a service to a consumer, the consumer trusted you and paid certain amount of money to you so that they can get that wow experience which they're not getting with any other business, which potentially could be your competitor. In such scenarios, you've kind of forced that relationship very early in at the stage of transaction, and sometimes even a lot before that. For example, when someone visits your office or your retail store, typically when there is some kind of a break in consumer experience, which happens quite often. For example, you may send a car for service and you may not get the best service done like the way it was washed, for example, in the way it was washed in the last time, or you feel a challenge that, you know what, I gave an extra value for this, but I could have gone to, let's say, a street side car service technician, and he would have done the job, let's say, at, I don't know, 70%, 80% of the cost. I feel that any kind of consumer experience breaks which happen in between, a consumer is more likely to go out on social media and tag you and make sure that you hear him. But one thing that we have definitely learned as an automobile dealer who's so diversified in terms of the customer base is, every time a consumer comes with a problem, sometimes we are also at fault. Even in those scenarios, it's always good to be transparent. It's always good to accept the problem by first identifying the problem, what happened internally. And we have this huge process internally where anytime you reach out to the dealerships, there is a team which is just tracking the quality of this particular customer ticket which is closed. I think that's very important for any business to do now as a remediary measure to the way the consumers are now suddenly connecting with brands. And it's a very two-way conversation that you're happening on social media, right? So rather considering that to be a business challenge, uh, we actually consider that to be a business opportunity for us. Because over a period of time, when you are so transparent and so communicative to your consumers, where you accept your mistakes, sometimes you have to tell the customer that it was not your mistake, and they may feel bad about it. But it's very important that you keep that transparency on, because in the long run, what we have seen is a new consumer would come, have a similar problem that, let's say, this person A had, let's say, 2 years back, posts on your Facebook page. Suddenly we would see that this person A who had a similar problem 2 years back would actually comment on this consumer's post and say that it could be a fault at your end and not at the dealership end. Don't try to malign the reputation of a business just because you did not have a good experience. Now, I think that's a wow factor for any kind of a consumer business, consumer business in specific. And it's a wow factor for a lot of consumers also, because suddenly they start seeing this positivity around your business where they feel that, you know what, I can trust this brand. It's okay. They may make a mistake. But the point is, if I'm communicative, if I ask for a solution, they are going to offer me a solution. And a lot of times, I mean, we have been in this situation where a person would know the senior management of our organization and they would directly reach out to them. But still, we would ensure that that process is followed, and still we would track the quality of the closure, because it's very important that in the long run, the kind of customer experience you are offering, this is all something which is visible online, right? It's going to be there, written in stone. This is not going to change, or you cannot delete it. So at the end of the day, what matters to you as a business or a brand is to utilize this as an opportunity to build that trust, to build upon that trust that you forced at the time when someone actually purchased your product for the first time. So I think it's really about consumer lifecycle management, and there are ways to do it in a much organized way.
Exactly. It's all about customer life cycle management and how you effectively deal with the issue. That's very important. My next question is, how is your journey with Navnit Group? Would you like to share your journey experience with the participants?
So, I mean, in terms of my initial few months, I think I started out there with a role purely in digital marketing, but I do have a experience where I've built businesses for a lot of traditional organizations.
Just to interrupt you, most of the people are not aware about the Navneet group per se. In Bombay, most of the people are quite familiar, but here people are not aware. Just can you just enlighten them what Navneet group does and everything, so that will set up the stage.
Sure. So, Navneet Group is basically a diversified set of businesses. We sell more cars than maybe the bottom five in the top 10 automobile companies in India. Uh, we would service more than 1 lakh cars in a year. Uh, One of the largest dealerships in Western India. We have outlets in Bombay, outlets in Ahmedabad, outlets in Karnataka. Uh, Primarily an automobile business. We have some other businesses like insurance, broking, etc. Uh, what I do at Navneet Group is to ensure that the kind of investments we are doing in digital marketing, digital process, and eventually extracting value from digital is sort of taken care of. And I've sort of done that in different capacities in my early phase at the start of my job at Navneet. And the idea initially when I joined was to explore the areas where a dealership can start digitizing the business. From that standpoint to moving to the initiative that I was just talking about, which was purely around creating that customer convenience at reception, we started creating that value for senior management where suddenly they saw that digital marketing is purely not about showing an ad on Google or responding to someone on social media and getting worried about your brand image on social media. It's actually a business opportunity. It's in fact over a period of time become a new channel of business, which has a huge potential and it's growing anything in double digits. And there's nothing in automobile dealership which has ever grown in double digits, unfortunately. So this is something which I think has happened over a period of time where you start those small projects, work with multi-functional teams, build those initiatives, and sort of grow into uh, uh, a larger initiative which has a bigger impact on the organization. We started out small. We started from one small dealership and we moved down to some 18 dealerships eventually. Uh, Executing this project. And I mean, while we were doing all of this, the idea was pretty clear that if we are putting in money, we need to some value at some point. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even in the same month, but definitely a visible, clear value. And that is to be measured back to the cost that we incurred. So it should not happen that suddenly if we start selling, let's say 10% more cars, uh, you are not able to address that particular activity to the marketing investment that you would have made on digital, let's say at some time back. So there has to be a real connection between the way you would have launched the digital initiatives. I think it's very uh, sort of doing things from scratch and rolling your sleeves sort of a work that we would have done at Navnit Group. But the idea is to sort of be a part of that journey where you see through this business going through demonetization, GST, and so on and so forth, and sort of learn on the way.
Great, great, great. Amazing. Uh, this is my, I think, second last question. Since everyone is at home due to COVID and everyone is learning new skills and everything, my specific question to you is what COVID-19 has taught you?
I actually learned to cook. I never knew how to make chapatis, so now I know how to make chapatis.
Okay, only chapati.
I think that's something that I really enjoy now. So maybe that's something which is coming to my mind. But
Yeah,
definitely, in terms of reading, you kind of get a lot more time to read. You kind of get a lot more time to catch up with all your close friends and
exactly.
relatives that you would have never had a chance. Uh, and you need to be optimistic about these times. I mean, it's a hard time. No one has ever seen such time, but I think yeah, you learn to deal with it with developing some kind of a hobby or learning new thing.
Great, great. And my last question is, what would be your advice for the freshers who are entering into the digital marketing or who are there into the digital marketing industry as a fresher? If you, most of the participants are fresher into the digital industry, what would be your sort of advice for them if they want to start something, a digital startup or enter into the industry as a working professional? What would be your advice for them?
Uh, See, okay. Personally, I feel that everyone has their own challenges when they are going through their education and then they realize that they want to get into digital. So I may not be able to give a very exacting sort of advice per se, but what I can definitely tell you is if I were to do this again and if I was a fresher right now, I would have really gotten my hands dirty right at the beginning. And if I were a digital marketer starting now, I would have made sure that I would have learned everything on the job. A degree definitely helps. It opens a lot of doors in terms of the kind of opportunities you can pursue. But at the same time, digital is a very practical skill. If you're cognizant about marketing, you have a knack for a little bit of knack for sales, you like to look at numbers, or if you have some kind of a aesthetic sense, or you have some kind of a creative sense, you're good at design, you are excited to work with people who can come from as diverse backgrounds as commerce to engineering to MBAs to mathematics and so on and so forth. I think that kind of a passion really goes a long way. And also sort of not worrying too much about failure. I think that's very important to not worry too much about failure is maybe one thing that I would definitely tell myself if I were to start now, because digital is a very experimentative field where things are very dynamic. You may learn something today which is working for your let's say Google search campaign, which may just change very quickly in few hours. So you need to be very proactive in terms of the way you do this work, and be passionate about all these things, right? I think everything else sort of follows in terms of the kind of knowledge or the kind of people that you get to work with. I think you may find those people every now and then if you are active enough, listening to such webinars, going to conferences, learning from people who've been in the industry.
Great, great. So it's a perfect time to get your hands dirty and enter into the digital marketing industry in a full scale. This is the best advice that Mr. Sameer can give. With that note, we'll end up the session. First of all, we'd like to, it's absolute honor, Sameer, to have you on our digital masterclass series, sharing your expert views, opinions with our participants. And I think all the participants actually indeed loved the entire session. Some are actually DM me that that was an amazing session. I request all the participants, you can share your feedback. Mr. Sameer is there on LinkedIn. You can put up a post. You can take the screenshot or a picture of the screen. You can put it that on LinkedIn. You can tag Mr. Sameer and you can share your honest opinion and views about the same. And thank you so much again, Sameer, for the amazing session that we had. And yeah, it was absolute honor to have you. We'll stay in touch for sure. And if I come to Bombay, we'll surely meet up.
Thank you so much for your time. Thanks everyone.
Yeah,
Stay safe.
thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.